My name is Emily Nadon. I am a pelvic floor physiotherapist here in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about the pelvic floor basics. I do want to disclaim that this is for education purposes only. Please do not take any of this advice as your own. If you do have concerns, please talk to your family physician or to a trusted, friendly pelvic health physio near you. Let's get right into it. This is the female pelvis. And let's talk a little bit about the basics. So our anatomy, we have our pelvis. So we'll keep it really, really simple. This is not an anatomy course. It's just about the basics. So we've got our pelvis. We've got the front of our pelvis is connected by our pubic symphysis to the pubic bones. We've got our sacrum and our coccyx, that are the tiny bones in the back that are connecting the tailbone. And then we have our pelvic floor at the bottom. So the pelvic floor has three main layers. Again, we can go into tons of detail. We'll keep it really simple. We've got our sphincter layer, or our outer layer. And then we've got our urogenital triangle underneath that. We've got some connective tissues and ligaments that help to support. And then we've got our deep muscles, the deep bowl. You see it well, but they are a bunch of little muscles that are connected together. And somehow they all connect at coccyx, either directly or indirectly. So why are these muscles important? These muscles help to support our organs. So our uterus, our rectum, and our bladder. They help with stability and support. So they support our spine from the bottom, and they support the pelvis. We just mentioned that there's some sphincters. So there's a sphincteric function where they help to close the sphincters of our bladder and our rectum. These muscles are also important with sexual function. And there's also a sump pump piece. So, right, we've got blood flow coming from the head, the heart, down through the pelvis into our feet. And then from our feet, they have to come back up through the pelvis to the heart. So sometimes this area can get congested. So we have to make sure that those muscles can pump everything back up and down. So let's go back to those organs, right? The rectum is right at the back of our pelvic floor. Our uterus, if we have one, and our cervix are in the middle. And then the bladder is snugged right up in the front. And one of the things I like to bring attention to is that these three organs are actually really close together. They're kind of all snuggling or hugging each other. And so they can affect each other as well. It's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we have good gut health and bowel health, because constipation can affect our bladder as well. So the pelvic floor does not work by itself. It's actually part of a pressure system, as our body is part of several systems together as well. So we're going to use a balloon analogy, thanks to Julie Weeb, who's a physio in the States, who taught me this stuff. So the balloon is to show the intra-abdominal pressure. So at the top of the balloon, that's going to be our diaphragm, which sits right underneath our lungs. It allows the lungs to expand by contracting down. So the diaphragm is right here. Sometimes it's considered one of our breathing muscles. The pelvic floor is at the bottom. Okay. And around the edges, we have our transversus abdominis. We have 4 layers of abs. We've got the deepest layer is the transversus abdominis, and it wraps all the way around like a balloon. And then in our spine, we have some tiny little muscles called multifidus or multifidi, and they wrap segmentally up the spine, almost look like a braid when you see them. So this is a pressure system. We use our breath to connect to our pelvic floor and to kind of use the mechanics of our body to best use our pelvic floor when we're having issues with other things as well. So when we take a breath, what's supposed to happen is that diaphragm contracts down. And as it contracts down, it increases pressure 360 degrees into this balloon, into this abdominal area. As it does that, so the pelvic floor is kind of going with the diaphragm. This contracts down, the pelvic floor expands down. As we exhale, the pelvic floor will recoil up, the diaphragm will recoil up. So they kind of work together like a piston, up and down. And the abdominals also will move with that, and your rib cage will expand as well. When we take a breath, everything expands. As we exhale, things will recoil and come up. So this is one of the ways that you can connect to your pelvic floor. So if you want to try it, Put your hands on your belly, on your rib cage, on your lower belly as well. Maybe you close your eyes. You really want to make sure that your chest is staying as soft as possible. A little bit of movement in your chest is okay, but we don't want your shoulders rising up a lot or wasting breath there when it comes to pelvic floor mobility. So if you want, we'll have one hand on the chest here, one hand on your belly or your ribs, and take a nice inhale down into your body, thinking about that pressure system. Inhale, hands move out and down here. Exhale, they come back in. The pelvic floor, right, against the chair that you're sitting on, you should be able to feel that pressure down as well. So again, if you can't, close your eyes, expand the belly, expand the pelvic floor, exhale. The pelvic floor whispers up and the abdominals come up as well. So if you are having trouble finding that, you might sit on something like a little bit of a ball, or sometimes rolling up a towel or having some sort of surface to put your pelvic floor on. You might be able to feel that a little bit better. Sometimes you can use a little baby cough to actually feel a little reverberation down at the pelvic floor that will help you to connect with it as well. So that's kind of the anatomy in a nutshell. And then we know that the anatomy does not work alone. It works as part of a system. So when we have things like stress urinary incontinence, that pressure system gets put to work. So when you cough or sneeze, right, the diaphragm comes down, you feel that pressure at your pelvic floor. Okay. If there's a leakage, or if there's just, you feel something not right down here, let's use leakage as the example, right? That means that there's a pressure problem in this system. So the stress of that pressure causes the pelvic floor to not function properly. What can happen is the pelvic floor muscles might be really, really not working well, or flaccid, or just really relaxed, and they might be dysfunctional and not know how to work. So they might just relax and pull down when you cough. The other side is if the muscles are too overactive, it's like if they're already so tight and you ask them to do something else to support you, they literally have no more capacity left to contract. And so you might have a little dribble through your urethra. So what do we do about that? So we do what's called the knack, and all it is a squeeze of the pelvic floor right before you sneeze, or right before you cough, or you laugh, or exercise, whatever the movement or thing is that causes you to leak. So the idea is, if this is again our pelvic floor system, you cough, right? What we want to do is we'll squeeze the pelvic floor first, then we'll cough. We'll have the support, hopefully, of those muscles to limit us from leaking. Naturally in our body, this is a reflex, right? So we shouldn't have to think about these things, but in life, things happen. So we might have trauma, we might have given birth, there might be stressors in our life. There's several different things that can be playing a part, but regardless, we want to learn to connect to that system and retrain it. It really is like potty training for adults or anyone in life, because when the system gets dysfunctional, the cool thing is it is retrainable as well. So that's the knack, that's the squeeze right before a sneeze, or a close of the pelvic floor right before a cough. Sometimes you're going to miss them. So let's say you cough and you had a little dribble. Then we would do what's called the leak and three-peat. Now the leak and three-peat is as simple as it sounds. You might have a leak, and then 3 times after that leak, you use those repetitions to train the pelvic floor to communicate with the brain and that pressure system, so that over time, it will become reflexive again. So the three-peat, you will cough, maybe you dribble, and maybe you're at the grocery store, okay? So you're in public, you felt a dribble, oh shoot, it doesn't have to be a big cough. If you have sneezes you have more than one sneeze coming on, you can use those sneezers as well. And if you don't have more sneezes, you can use coughs after your sneeze as well. So you cough, sneeze, and there's pressure, you leak. Okay, so then 3 times in a row, you're going to squeeze and then cough, squeeze, cough, squeeze, cough. And then you'll retrain that system. Okay, so that's the nap and the leak and three-peat. So what about urgency? Urgency is rushing to the bathroom, or the overwhelming need to go to the bathroom regardless of whether the bladder is full or not. So urgency is actually messages that come from our nervous system. So to keep things really simple, we've got in our central nervous system, we've got our sympathetic nervous system is what we call our flight or fight. So this is where we're on the go, we're running away from that cougar or animal in the past, or we're stressed at work. So this is where we're high stress. Our Western culture kind of makes us be here sometimes. Not really nice for our bladder. And then we want the other side, the parasympathetic, is the rest and digest side of things. So our calm state, our relaxed down here. So when we're stuck up here, we do get signals to our bladder, and it might cause it to give these little contractions that we have to learn to figure out what they're telling us. Normally in a bladder filling cycle, so in the micturition cycle, we have our bladder, we have our pelvic floor, and we have our brain, and they're all communicating. So at rest, this little bladder is relaxed. So there is muscles around that bladder, and there's smooth muscle on the inside, and it's stretching and filling at all times, unless we're actually voiding. On the other side, or underneath that, we have the pelvic floor, and they're what we call reciprocal. So when this is relaxed, this is contracted. It's actually on and off, so it's tonically active, so it's kind of flickering like our other postural muscles in our body. It's on and off, on and off, on and off, so it's checking in with any kind of movements in our body. So for simplicity, we'll call this on, and we'll call this off when we're at rest. Okay, so as we're sitting here, the bladder starts to fill, and it goes through several little events where it will get in a little bit of fluid. It will send a message to the brain saying, hey, I've got a little fluid in here. And then the brain gets to decide, I think we're going to wait. Okay, so we keep waiting, sends a little contraction again. Hey, brain, I have more fluid. Maybe it's half full. The brain says, I think we can wait longer. Okay, we wait a little bit longer. Finally, it says, I have to go to the bathroom now. And so we get this really strong urge from the bladder saying, let's go, let's go, let's go. And then the brain says, okay, fine, let's go to the bathroom. So that's what happens in a normal bladder filling cycle. When we have urgency, we might get that message earlier in that filling cycle. So maybe instead of it being, 750 cc's, we get that message at 200 cc's saying, I have to go right now, and it's really loud, and we can't think of anything else but the bladder having to go pee. So if that happens, the pelvic floor, remember the pelvic floor is on, so it's getting a little bit of confused messaging as well with the bladder trying to overwork. So that is urgency, having that message earlier in the cycle, overwhelming the brain with messages that I have to go pee. So because it's part of our nervous system, if we can calm ourselves down, going into that parasympathetic state, we can actually tell the bladder who's the boss, and we can say, shut up, bladder, you're not in charge. So that's where breath can come in again, because when we inhale and exhale, we actually can calm that system down. There's evidence that talks about breathing brings us into that state. So that's one of the first ways that we can start calming that urgency down. When we actually get to the bathroom now, the bladder will contract when we sit on the toilet because the brain says it's your turn. Then the pelvic floor, when we're sitting on the toilet, it should actually be relaxing at that point. So it has to shut off in order to let the bladder go. So again, they're always going to be opposite, or they want to be opposite. But the brain communication with these plays an important part. So again, that's a normal thing. When we rush to the bathroom, we kind of continue to instill that we're stuck in this flight or fight pattern, and we let the bladder continue to be the one in charge. So it is really important that we can do some techniques to calm that system and retrain our bladder and our pelvic floor and our brain. So urgency techniques, the first thing to do is to just do some deep breaths to calm our system down. And then if we know that these are opposite, if the bladder is contracting when it shouldn't, we use that pelvic floor muscle contractions, or sometimes called Kegels. We can use those contractions to tell the bladder to shut off for a little bit. So we breathe, we can do some quickies, we can do some long holds and some relaxations to just really make sure that these muscles are in control, and then this one is not. Other things that we can do is we can, standing, right, you can put your hand on a wall, and that will sometimes distract you. If you have an available chair, you can sit down. You can also think about counting backwards by maybe count backwards from 100 by 9 seconds. So just distracting your brain. You can use a tactile touch. So Pelvic Health Solutions taught us to dig our finger into our thumb just to help to think that instead of feeling the urgency and the messages from the pelvic floor and the brain. You can think about your next vacation. Distract yourself with something else to stop the bladder from being the boss. Okay. When the urge subsides, then you can walk slowly towards the bathroom. And sometimes the hardest part is we'll get the technique, we'll have that urge calmed, and then we go to the bathroom and then it comes back. So we have to sometimes in that one trip to the bathroom, we might have to stop 3 or 4 times and repeat these techniques to get control of the bladder. Because if we don't, if we rush to the bathroom after doing these techniques, the urgency still wins, and we still are stuck with that same issue. So please be patient. It can be really, really hard. One of the other techniques is to actually have form pressure or form closure on the urethra. So right there. If we put a hand or you put something just blocking that little area, short term, right, it'll send a message saying, oh, no, you can't come out. But unfortunately, that doesn't last long because those muscles, right, they're the ones that have to do the work. The pelvic floor, if they're not doing the job, even if you push something against it or close your legs, cross your legs, they can't stop the flow of urine. So it's a short-term answer only. So then now, how about we think about putting these techniques into real life? Okay, so that's real life, but I mean like into activities of daily living. So we have that pressure system. We'll bring my balloon back. Okay, so if we know that if we cough or sneeze and there's pressure down and we exhale, things come up, inhale, things go down, exhale, things come up. We can use that, the mechanics of that breath and that intra-abdominal pressure, we can use that with activities of daily living and exercise. So Julie Weeb has also taught us to do what's called exhale with exertion, or blow as you go, or blow before you go. Because if you blow, then you're going to be exhaling. The idea with this is as that pelvic floor is coming up, it's actually going to be going into its shorter state, which as it's going into its shorter state, you'll be able to contract those muscles, even if they're a little bit overactive. I really do want to stress the point that if you don't know what your pelvic floor is doing, then you should talk to someone to make sure that you're not doing a bunch of pelvic floor contractions with an overactive pelvic floor, because that can make your symptoms worse. So the blow as you go, or the exhale with exertion, is literally as simple as the transition movement, or the hardest part of a task is when you will exhale. So if I'm going to stand up from this chair, I'm going to start in sitting with an inhale. And then as I exhale, I'm going to squeeze my pelvic floor, and then I'm going to keep exhaling, and then I'm going to use my outside muscles to help me stand up. So I'll inhale. I'm going to squeeze my floor and stand up with that exhale. Inhale to go back down. The pelvic floor will expand like a flower. And then let's try again. Exhale, squeeze the pelvic floor. Exhale. Use the big outside muscles to help. Inhale to sit down. Okay. So that's the idea with a chair, right? Sitting to standing. We would exhale to stand up. A squat would be a very similar thing to that. Okay. So if you are vacuuming, you might, the pushing and pulling of a vacuum, you might exhale, inhale, and then pull and exhale as well. So you can match those exhales to whatever works the best for you with your activities of daily living. So what goes with that exhale and that pelvic floor lift is to create tension across midline. So if we look at this as that balloon again, and we're squeezing our pelvic floor as we exhale, we also want to make sure that we are tensioning our midline. So if this is the linea alba, or the middle of our abdominals, we're going to think about zipping up from our anus to our sternum, to our xiphoid process right underneath here with that exhale to get that entire pressure system controlled and pushing the air out together, or pushing that pressure upward together. So tensioning across midline, exhale with exertion and squeeze that pelvic floor with two things. That will give you the most control from the inside out to do activities. So one more time, we've got that pressure system. You're going to inhale to stay sitting. You're going to exhale. You're going to squeeze your pelvic floor and exhale. Okay, inhale, come back down. And then we'll add in that tension across midline. We inhale. We exhale. As we're exhaling, we squeeze the pelvic floor and we tension that midline. Inhale, come back down. Relax the belly, relax the floor. Right, so that tension is like a zipper. Now that we have discussed the basics of the pelvic floor and how to breathe and how to work on stress and urge incontinence, please see our other videos on our YouTube channel for exercises that you can incorporate these techniques in with. If you have questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the U of A Rehab Robotics Lab, and information is in the description box below.